they don't care about the boys. They care about winning elections. That's what they care about. And there was a very interesting discussion by Ezra Klein of the New York Times and his guest on the gender divide and why Trump won the last election. Listen here.
This chart in some ways convinced me to do this podcast.
Oh, thank you.
This chart shocks me.
I agree. This is, to me, the scariest chart in this entire presentation. And again, something I'm very surprised by. And so what you can see is that, for voters over 30, the gender gap was fairly stable at around 10%, which is roughly where it's been in American politics.
And voters over 75, it's even lower.
But what's crazy is if you look at people who are under the age of 30, the gender gap has exploded. If you look at 18-year-olds, 18-year-old men were 23 percentage points more likely to support, Donald Trump than 18-year-old women, which is just completely unprecedented in American politics.
Is that abortion?
I think it's too early to say exactly what the cause is.
Of course.
What's interesting is that this is happening in other countries as well.
There is a sense the Democratic Party is becoming much more pro-women party, and in some ways sort of anti-young men, and that just had a huge effect on young men's political opinions.
Of course, his guest there, David Shore, that's where his mind goes on being shown these numbers of the gender gap and why young men overwhelmingly are moving to the Republican Party. It's abortion. That is their number one issue on the left. It must define everything, as opposed to taking a hard look at what their side has been doing to young men for, yes, decades, but the peak over the past 10 years has just driven these young men to extreme measures. I mean, some are suicidal. The deaths of despair have gone up to tens of thousands per year. Scott Galloway, who's writing a book on this, he said we've lost more young men to deaths of despair, some 400,000 over the past few years, than we lost in one of the world wars. It's all about abortion in the mind of the left. That's how we have to fix it somehow, Jordan.
Well, that's also a profoundly stupid theory, even from a conceptual perspective, because there's no reason a priori to assume that access to abortion, I mean, if it appeals to young women who want to keep the sexual revolution going with no cost, hypothetically, why wouldn't it appeal to young men for exactly the same reasons? It's just a stupid idea, but it shows you how bereft the Democrat theorists are on the ideational side to jump to that conclusion immediately. And, what they don't understand, really, there's a long list, things they don't understand, but in the Black community, let's say, with regard to Black young men, is that by not concentrating on marriage. So at this group I put together in London called the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, we tried to put together a visionary form of conservatism and classic liberalism, let's say, because conservatives aren't very good on the vision front generally, because their attitude is we should just keep doing what we're doing that works. And that's not exactly a vision. And things are so unstable now that even the conservatives have to put forward a vision. And one of the biggest fights we had within our organization was a fight in relationship to how are we going to conceptualize support for the future, families. And we settled on long-term, stable, committed, heterosexual, child-centered marriages, knowing that there has to be a domain of tolerance around that center ideal, because people get divorced and there are single mothers and there are gay people and there are widows and there are orphans. I mean, just because there's an ideal doesn't mean you shouldn't pay attention to the margin, let's say, but the ideal has to stay intact. Now, you might say, well, why is that a saleable message to young people? You see, I know why, because I've been selling that message to young people for 15 years and very successfully. So I know what I'm talking about. What you want to tell young men is that they have something crucially important to do that's exciting and difficult and meaningful, and they find that in the voluntary adoption of responsibility. They don't find that in idiot hedonism or in the struggle for power. They find it in their willingness to make themselves into somebody who might be attractive to a young woman, let's say, who has her head screwed on straight enough to understand that there isn't a greater privilege that she'll have in her life if she's fortunate than to become a mother. You know now, maybe half of women in the West at 30 have no child. Half of those women will never have a child. They won't find a mate, and they won't have a child. And 90% of them will be very upset about that. And so by deprioritizing marriage, we're doing young people such a terrible disservice. It's like, let's think about young Black men. It's like, okay, they're not going to get married. So then, first of all, why the hell should they grow up? Like, young men grow up. We know this. We've known this as psychologists for decades. Young men quit their adolescent hijinks somewhere in their mid-20s if they gain stable employment and find a mate. And the reason they do that is because they think, well, why the hell not just drink and carouse around if no one's depending on me? You know, and that's a reasonable question. I'm not saying that's a particularly mature attitude, but it takes you need something resting on your shoulders to motivate you to take the leap into sacrificial responsibility. But the thing about sacrificial responsibility, that's what I've outlined in this new book of mine, by the way, is that it lends meaning to your life. Real meaning, the kind of meaning that sustains you through suffering. It's like, well, why not be Peter Pan and hang out forever with Tinkerbell the porn fairy and be king of the Lost Boys? And the answer to that is because you miss your life. And you'll have nothing to go for you, nothing to rely on when times of trouble come to visit you. Grow the hell up. Now, well, what does the left tell young men? Well, if you grew up in adopted responsibility, you'd just be oppressing your wife because marriage is an oppressive patriarchal institution. You know, even though married women with children are by far the happiest women.
The happiest.
Surprise, surprise. Yeah.
That's right. That was just reaffirmed in a poll that came out last week. By far, that their happiness dwarfs the other groups.
Yeah. Well, and married religious people have the most sex. So there's a comical statistic for you. That's the culmination of 60 years of sexual revolution. The hedonists don't have anybody. They're in the basement having their way with the pornographic screen, and the married religious couples are happy and sexually fulfilled. Well, that isn't what anybody predicted in 1963. So everything's upside down, Megyn. Everything's upside down. And young men have figured it out. And I know that because I see thousands of them everywhere, all over the world, all the time. And I'll tell you that people who come to my shows now, they look a hell of a lot better than they did 5 years ago. They're standing.
Is that right?
They've got a partner. They've got a child. They tell me what they've done. They're thrilled about it. Enough of this. Bloody Democrats, this idiot progressivism. You just have no idea how many people that's ruined. And we haven't even started to talk about what it's done to young women. Christ, right? They're so deluded.
Tariff wars, stubborn inflation. No wonder gold has been routinely hitting all-time highs, right? In volatile markets like the one we have now, don't sit on the sidelines with your head in the sand. You can take control and safeguard your savings. This is why so many Americans today are turning to Birch Gold Group. They have helped tens of thousands convert an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in physical gold. Is it time for you to hedge against economic instability with gold? Well, to learn more about how to own physical gold in a tax-sheltered account, just text MK to 989898. Birch Gold is going to send you a free, no-obligation info kit. Again, just text MK to the number 989898. Birch Gold's got an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. That's big, A+. They've got countless of 5-star reviews, and they have helped too many to count protect their savings with gold. It took us decades to get into the tangled mess that we are now trying to unpack in DC. How long do you think it's going to take for us to really get out of it, and at what cost? Text MK to 989898 today. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.